Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm Will Roosh, here to talk about all kinds of controversial issues with an open mind and looking at all different perspectives to try and figure out what's going on, what is true, what isn't. I believe that dialogue is the best way through that. So my guest today is Pamela Garfield Jaeger, and she is a licensed certified social worker for the past 20 years, doing all kinds of work within social work. And I think that understanding a lot of what's happening in society, I think going to the people who are experts in the field of understanding society, understanding people, is extremely valuable. And I saw her work and I said, all right, let's have a conversation about what's going on. So Pamela, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate what you're doing. Can you give my audience a little bit of a background? Because you've been in this game for a long time. So what is your background? And then what got you to extend into the interwebs? Because I was just a classroom teacher for so long. And then eventually I was like, you know what, I gotta do what I'm doing in the classroom out into the world a little bit, because I got into this to try and make a positive change. And instead of just getting to my 80 students a year or whatever it is, 100 students a year, I can maybe bootstrap that into something bigger. I don't know if it was something similar for you, but welcome. Tell us a little bit about your background and then also what got you to, doing stuff online.
Okay, well, currently I'm doing probably something similar to you. I'm writing an online program so that I can reach a whole bunch of parents. It's a website called The Truthful Therapist, thetruthfultherapist.org. It's not done yet, but I'm working on it, and that's my big pet project right now. Well, not pet project, big project.
Yeah.
And that's basically a parent's guide to mental health. And the reason I started writing that is before that, I was working at a program. It's called IOP PHP, which is a group therapy program. I was mostly working with teens, but I was a per diem, basically floating between adults and teens. But they put me mostly with the teens because that's where my strengths lie, and also where most other therapists' strengths don't lie. And I think where they don't, it's harder, let's just say, it's more challenging. And a lot of them didn't want to be in the teen program, and I enjoyed it. So I ended up helping a lot with the teen program, and that's where they had a lot of vacancies. So I was helping there. And that's where I was seeing all this stuff. That was last year in 2021. I was seeing what we're going to talk about in more depth about the big explosion and different trans kids and how the therapists were treating it. So I was there. And then before that, I had actually lived with a disability for quite a while. And so I was kind of out of my profession. And so that's why I'm kind of like group van therapist. I came back.
Okay.
So before that, I was working in schools. I worked at Gun High School in Palo Alto while there was actually a suicide cluster. So I have a lot of experience working with crisis intervention and working in schools, working with teachers, working in administration. So I think we have a lot in common that way.
Yeah.
Worked in a lot in the school setting. And I also before that worked in foster care, group homes, residential programs, programs for severely mentally ill, both adults and teens. And I actually came from New York originally. I went to NYU back in the late 90s and went to NYU. I worked in the inner cities. I, did home visits with families, mostly families who are on welfare benefits. This was in the 90s when there was actually welfare to work. So the climate was a little different then. But I was going through the projects and really made strong connections with families there, minority families, which I think makes me different from a lot of other people, where I really got to know them in a way that most, I'd say, lighter skinned. I was a formal liberals. I'd say I was a liberal for a long time, didn't have that experience. So I think that informs a lot of the things that I came to the conclusion today about. And so I have a wide range of experience that spans over 20 years, basically with inner city neighborhoods, residential programs, mental health programs, schools, and hospital settings.
So it's mostly clinical work. It's talking to people about what they're going through, and then using your background, your education and knowledge of how the brain works and how trauma manifests and stuff like that to help them to make sense of it and then work them through specific techniques to try and overcome that and find success? Things
Yeah,
like
I
that.
mean, some of it's techniques, a lot of it's exploring insight. I didn't even mention this, but I was actually a lot of these years I was a clinical supervisor. So I was actually helping other therapists do the work. Basically I was supervising other people work with families and kids and help them explore. A lot of it has to do with when you're a therapist, you're listening to people, you're helping them, you're exploring with them, you're helping them gain insight. Yes, you're using techniques, but a lot of it is really about the interpersonal, working with them, helping them figure out what's going on, help them use their own agency to make better decisions, figure out patterns in their life, things of that sort. And when you're a therapist, and myself included, nobody is immune to this. You basically you run into what's called countertransference, which is where you get a lot of feelings working with people that stir up your crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Your
so
own stuff. Yeah.
your own stuff gets stirred up. And what makes a good therapist is someone that has that awareness and that insight, and they don't let that get in the way of working with people. So I did a lot of supervision, which a lot of my role of that was, yes, to help them know what to do in a crisis, help them figure out techniques on what to do with certain situations, help them, figure out how to do an assessment, what are maybe some of the diagnoses or what are some of the needs of the person, but then also helping them figure out what's their own issues that might be getting in the way or might be informing them of what's happening in the room. Because you also can use it beneficially, because if you're a therapist and you're feeling really irritated in the room with a person, you can either figure out this might be about you, or it might be about it might inform you of what other people in this person's life feels like when they're with this person, right? So it gives you some insights. And so, exploring all those issues and then figuring out how to work with someone, obviously with compassion and empathy, and helping them make better decisions in their life.
Oh, I mean, that relates a lot to teaching too. There's a lot of teachers that get super annoyed by kids because it drums up something about that in them, and then they take it out on this 15-year-old. It's like,
totally.
Yeah, you got to look in the mirror a little bit.
That's completely it. And it's funny because when I worked at the school, I wasn't technically a therapist for the teachers, but I ended up being a therapist for many teachers. They'd come to my office and they'd say how overwhelmed they were, how this one kid was getting under their skin, or, the administration or the system, or, we were dealing with a real crisis. So they were feeling really anxious, worried that they were going to miss a kid that really needed help. And they were really scared, all their own anxieties popping up. So I was helping them with that stuff too. Yeah. Every human being runs into this, and that's what makes us human.
Yeah, you've labeled yourself a little bit online as being red pilled. And
Yeah.
red pilled, it might be traced back to the Matrix, where the blue pill is like the fantasy and the red pill is like the truth. Candace Owens put her name when she was first coming on like the online scene as red pill black, and then got kind of be associated with being red, like Republican, like red state. And I don't necessarily always agree with that. Kind of to try to be like not partisan about things. But what was your experience when it comes to being red pilled, essentially? Because I had my own stuff of like, oh, what I think is true might not be true. That's kind of like my red pill moments that I've gone through in my life, whether it's marrying into a different culture, exposure to new ideas, whatever it might be. But it's a fundamental change that, oh, I'm seeing things differently now, especially you're in social work, you're in like therapy and stuff like that. That's generally, I'm assuming, pretty politically left dominated. I'm in education, which is pretty politically left dominated. So my like realization, my red pill moments definitely pulled me back from what was the norm within my field, which is why a lot of people say that I'm this conservative, this hardcore conservative, when I'm not. Nothing wrong with being conservative, but I'm not. I'm just calling out my profession and things that I see in my paradigm. I don't know if yours is similar, but where's your like background with this thing that you associate with being like red pilled?
So I was a lifelong Democrat. I'll disclose that I'm Jewish, and culturally, most Jews tend to be Democrat. My whole family is Democrat. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to NYU. I lived in New York City for many years. I was actually there during 9/11, and I really identify with living in the big city. I really loved New York City, and of course, it's more of a left-wing environment, and it's just always, I think that's all I've been around, and that's all I thought was the right thing.
Mhm.
And of course, as a social worker, I clearly had, more left-wing values. I believed before and that systemic racism was somewhat real. And my belief now is that it's mostly not, and it is mostly manufactured by the media, and the things that are causing disparities are not racism, and that there are other causes. So that was a huge red pill for me.
How did you come to that? Like, what was it, like reading a Thomas Sowell book or something like that? Was it just like exposure to an idea on a podcast? What got you to that? Like, oh, maybe what I know to be true isn't as true as I thought.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the truth is, and I've actually heard Thomas Sowell say something, but now I understand how the world works, and I didn't before, and now it makes sense to me. And before, I thought I believed these things, but none of it actually really made sense. It was all very confusing. It was just bad things happen. I don't understand why, and now I have a better understanding. But what woke me up was actually the 2020 mostly peaceful riots, that time period. So when everybody was posting their black squares, and in unison, everybody just said everybody and everything is racist, and if you don't post a black square, you're evil and racist. And I actually had former childhood friends that I grew up with. I went to sleepaway camp with, I was very close with in my life. I actually spent a year in Israel living with some of them, very big part of my life, attacking me, calling me racist and all that, for calling out the actual facts during the Breonna Taylor case, that she wasn't actually in her bed, and that she was involved in the drug ring, and she wasn't as innocent as they portrayed. And I actually posted the police report that showed those facts, and a group of people piled on and said I was racist and I was white-splaining. Some people thought my account was hacked, and people I hadn't heard from for years, even though I actually had been posting about going through a terrible health situation, and I had to drop out of my profession, and I went through, I was so disabled and in serious pain that I couldn't even tie my own shoes for a couple of years. That's how bad I was. And I hadn't heard from any of these people, but they thought that my account was hacked because I was so-called racist. 5 people called and texted me that day, and I actually cried. It really showed me that people are so tied into their narrative that they cared more about what I was posting about these social issues than me as a person. So yeah, that woke me up. All of that woke me up. And then I did a deep dive, and then I started doing some education. And then I started listening to Larry Elder's show. I watched his documentary Uncle Tom Film that featured a lot of these Black conservatives that you just named. I did listen. I haven't actually fully read a Thomas Sowell book because they're big, but I listened to a lot of his videos, and I've read some of his columns, and looked through a lot of his quotes and pieces of his writing, and really understood what his messaging about how the government and the breakdown of family, and how those things really impacted the Black community a lot harsher than racism. So I learned that. I was like, oh, red light, oh wow, whatever, green light, or whatever light, light. And so, little Miss Liberal social worker, just it blew my mind that, this new information, like actually, these policies that encourage families to stay apart, encourages women to, not find the proper partner for life, and for men to sort of evade responsibility, and all of that, made me realize that stuff is actually more harmful. In Thomas Sowell's words, one generation of the welfare state did more harm on the Black community than slavery did. He said that.
So,
and I believe him. So anyway, that's my value system.
I think that
and after not living my entire life, and I'm about to turn 49 years old. So
well, that's really disrupting. I think that there's something that happens because Dave Rubin kind of famously went through this. Larry Elder was part of that too, where he was on the left, and then he kind of became like more on the right.
I'm very connected to Dave Rubin. Cyberly. I listen to him all the time. I feel a deep connection to him in that way, or just philosophically.
I think that there's a missing element of that though, Pamela. I think that there's because yes, there is elements of like democratic policies you could say that are incentivizing, but there's also elements of Republican policies like the war on drugs, which are locking up a lot of the men in these communities for them not to be around. They're in a jail cell, unable, then they get out and then they can't get a job. How does that affect the communities too? I think that it's more flushed out. Like the Breonna Taylor thing, I actually had issues too, where I was talking about the facts of that case. But for me, I'm a fairly soft-hearted individual. I don't think that her being involved in a drug ring, it justifies her being shot the way that she did. I think that what it is, then you go, okay, well, why are drugs illegal? Because I'm a big proponent of changing the war on drugs. But then also what led her to be in a situation that she would act like that? Like what kind of childhood trauma has she had and stuff like that? I mean, you've seen a lot of kids would go through trauma. A lot of these people who turn to making terrible decisions. And then I find a lot of conservatives go, well, they made terrible decisions, so that's what happens when you make terrible decisions. But when you're around children a lot, and you have been, I have been, you see well, they're products of these terrible lives. And I understand that some kids come from terrible situations and they can pull out of that and go to university and build a good life for themselves, and other kids can't. There's a lot of reasons. There's psychological temperament reasons. There's individual, nuances in their experiences and stuff like that. I think that and I'm just assuming you're a social worker, so I'm assuming that when you would present the facts of the Breonna Taylor case, it's not like good thing she died. It's
of course not.
This is still really sad.
It's just not proof that our entire country is racist.
Right.
That's my point.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know Breonna Taylor, and I don't know George Floyd, and these people they're complicated human beings, and the situations were extremely complicated, and they were completely, sensationalized by the news. But the point is that that's what I mean. I remember when the George Floyd thing happened, and I thought it was terrible, like most of us did, but I just didn't understand how this one horrible, horrific, sensationalized, terrible situation meant our entire country is racist. Right. And now we need to defund the police, and we need to dismantle the whole system, and everybody needs to go along. And if you don't think that you're a racist person. So that's the piece that I just couldn't understand, how people take basically take their emotions and then, expand it to every single situation, broadly. And I just, that was strange to me.
I think it's the power of the image of it. I talk often about that turtle that had the straw up its nose, and that image is so powerful. The image of Derek Chauvin's knee on a crying man's back, knowing he died, the image is the story.
Yeah, it's terrific. I actually never even fully watched it because I avoided looking at it, because honestly, it was so awful. But back to your war on drugs thing, by the way, that was the Democrats. That was Joe Biden that did that 92 law thing. So whatever, but I don't want to get into Republicans versus Democrats. The politicians and the government in general, to me, is what the issue is. And what conservatives go for is, a lot of conservatives don't like what Republicans do either. I think people who are on the left don't realize that. It's about big government in general being too involved. And that's what conservatives' values are, to not have too much government involved, period. So that, we can argue about the nitty-gritty of which law is helpful and not helpful. And I mean, I'm not a civics expert here, but it's just about recognizing how policies do have these, they say unintended consequences, but now my cynical side thinks some of them are intended, but regardless, consequences. And so that's just something to think about. And the more we say, well, the government needs to fix this, let's throw more money at it. Every time they throw more money, the war on drugs, you just mentioned, the war on poverty, those are the two big ones. Both of those things, millions, trillions, I don't know how much dollars were thrown at it, and it didn't help anything. So let's stop with the government crap. And let's take responsibility in our communities. That's what a conservative's values are. And I honestly, as a social worker, wasn't as insightful on that before.
Yeah, well, it makes sense because, if you're talking about more libertarian leanings, I think libertarianism is going to have a resurgence for that reason. I think left and right libertarian movements are going to have resurgence, but a lot of social work funding, I believe, comes from government. Right?
Yeah, that's what's so weird about me. And I was doing home visits. I was helping people get food stamps. I was doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and most of the families I work with were on welfare. I do remember though, and I had tons of compassion for them. And I remember I remember being bitter. I was living in a tiny studio in New York City, busting my balls, making like $30,000 a year, going to their house. They were in these big apartments. Of course, they were in bad neighborhoods, but they had these huge apartments with, 3-bedroom apartments, huge flat screen TVs. This is in the early 2000s, late 90s. So that was actually a big deal then. They all had cell phones. They all had all this stuff. I was just scraping by, and they were laying around the house relaxed. I was spending all day riding the subways. And I remember just coming home feeling really resentful and angry. But then I said to myself, well, I'm the one making the decision to do this. These are my decisions. So I can't be angry at other people for that. I'm making this decision. And then what I ended up doing was quitting my job, moving cross country to California, and I became a bartender for a year before I picked my career back up again. But it's just whatever.
I mean, they're playing the game. I mean, like I see this with teenagers all the time. It's like they're going to play the game. And that gets into some of the issues that I think that that you address that I would like to talk about is, like you're talking about racism. I know a lot of teachers across the country. I have a cool network of different teachers. And if a kid knows, if they're like, the one black kid or the one Hispanic kid and like a bunch of white kids or something like that, or even if it's a diverse school, I know several teachers that when they fail a kid who's a minority, they play the race card. They say like, you're racist. Yeah. And then when you call that, you have to go in front of like a whole, administration board, whatever it is, and prove that it's not by showing like, here's like work and show that you're dividing it up equally, and all that kind of stuff. But it's a card. Why would you not play that card if you are a teenager? They're going to be looking for holes in the fences like there's velociraptors in Jurassic Park.
It's human nature. It's human nature. And so that's the other big difference.
They're going to do it.
By the way, as a former liberal, I was, naive. And I thought everybody did the best they could. And, I didn't really see human nature that way, but exactly what you're saying, it's human nature to get by on things, and I was just saying about those people, like they're sort of taking advantage, but I also saw that they were not happy and they were not in great situations. So I didn't really feel angry. I was just resentful of the whole scenario. And I was grateful for my life that I was able to make my own choices and everything. Yeah. But yeah, it's human nature. That's a big difference in worldview. Maybe that's my red pill, was just noticing how human nature plays a role. And when we put up policies to enable certain things, like getting away with bad grades or whatever, that makes a difference.
So do you see it as, because I'm naturally, on the left as well, and I think that's because I have a lot of sympathy for people and I have empathy for people too, but like I have a lot of they're in a tough spot. And I'm soft in my approach with them. I mean, do you have it from that angle? I'm assuming that you as a social worker, you got into this because you wanted to help people. That's not typically something that's more like, whatever left brain conservative type of person, gets into social work. They get into finance or engineering, some more binary stuff. You're into talking to people about their feelings and stuff. Do you now connect that where you got into this for the right reasons to help people with these policies are actually hurting people? So you actually haven't changed at your core?
I think in some ways I haven't changed at my core, but I've just learned a little more about how the world works. Yeah. I think that's probably it. I'm still, I guess if you were to look at some of the like more famous conservatives, I'm definitely softer in my, I guess the way I look at people than maybe some of they are, at least how their tone.
It's my biggest critique of the conservatives is that they don't, I like Arthur Brooks a lot. Like he wrote The Conservative Heart, just about how he believes conservative policies are actually more kind to people.
That's what I feel like. That's what I've been trying to convey. It's actually a lot of these policies are the things that conservatives stand for. They get a bad rap for being so tough and harsh and just toughen up, and you need to be tough. I actually was just listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and he was saying something about that's how conservatives think that people need to have this rough time to be able to be a good person, and that's what conservatives think. And I mean, that might be true for some, but that's really not what it's about. It's about just not enabling bad behaviors and to actually empower people to not fall into this victim narrative and to actually empower them so that they can be the best they can be. And I don't know if you know this, there is a book on this and I forgot what it's called, but Larry Elder talks about it. Conservatives give significantly more money to charity than liberals do, because they do really, they recognize that even, and most conservatives, if you look at their income level, it's not because they're richer. They give more in terms of the ratio of how much they make to charity than liberals do, because liberals rely on big government and they think government will fix it. Oh, this person will get food stamps, so I'm not going to give them food. But conservatives don't think government should be the answer, so the conservatives go and help. They believe churches, and charities, and they believe that communities are the ones that should be helping people, and they believe strongly in helping people.
Yeah,
So
a lot of that's probably connected to tithing at your church. But this is a good question, because I think how the optics of being on the left is that you are more caring, like you care more, because it says things like you're fighting racists and stuff. Like, well, so how do we, if you want people who are in that thinking that soft-hearted people are going to promote things that are good for, like that sound good, that look good. And that's why the PR for the left is so much better, is like you're pushing for things. It's like, the helping, disabled widows act. But then inside of that, it's like all kinds of crazy, pork barrel spending that's going to just,
enable all these problems
or something. Yeah.
I mean, okay, you mentioned drugs earlier. So I live near San Francisco. So they're basically having centers where people can literally go shoot up and have nurses and doctors look over them and provide them paraphernalia to do this. Even in my past liberal years, I thought this was controversial and a problem. People who are drug addicts do not need these behaviors enabled. That this is not compassionate. It feels compassionate to progressives, but it's actually hurting them. It's making these things that are very dangerous and lethal more accessible to them. Someone needs, drug addicts, the compassionate approach to drug addicts, there's something called motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing helps people get to the point where they're ready to make a change. And it's to help them change, especially something that's actually life-threatening. And so if you're enabling someone to do life-threatening behavior because you're compassionate and you want to make sure they do it safely, it's not true. And so if you look past these things, they're all about marketing, but what are they doing? They're actually enabling people to be more dependent and to do more dangerous behaviors, and they're creating more chaos. I mean, defund the police. That's creating more chaos in the communities. I know they want to make more programs and do this and that, but they didn't do that. They didn't set any of that up before they did it, before they called for that, and they canceled all of Oakland's police, and all the crime shot up instantly. That was creating chaos. In my opinion, I think it was intentional, but the people who are naive don't see that. They think, oh, well, now we'll help the kids with that money, but it doesn't actually work that way. It just sounds like it does. And once I got red pilled, as we said, I was able to see through these things. Basically, they're better at marketing. They're better at sounding like they're helping. But as soon as you can see through it and you look at not what you hope and what the idealistic version of things are, and you look at reality, then you realize, well, this stuff is actually creating the problems that they say they're helping.
Yeah, again,
it's like throwing gasoline on things and saying, oh, now here's my water. I'm going to throw some water on the fire and I'm the helper. That's how I see it now.
I think there's, again, a middle ground, because if you just say like lock up drug addicts, that's terrible. You say just let them just continue what they're doing, that's terrible. That's what we have in LA. These people need help. I think approaching drug addicts as a health issue, not a crime issue, makes a lot of sense. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So what would
I think
you
both,
do?
because honestly, as a person who's worked with drug addicts, they need that to wake up to change their behavior. So it depends. They need a kick in the butt. I mean, people need consequences. Usually what helps people change is when there are consequences in their lives. And when there are no consequences in their lives, they don't make better choices. So when they're stuck in that kind of pattern. So yes and no, it depends.
Yeah, maybe something like you want to come get your drugs or whatever. Like, because legalization, they've done it in Portugal and it works well, but there's like a whole process of like, you have to go through some therapy too. Like you got to pay that price. And a lot of people choose not to because they don't want to get uncomfortable. And that just deteriorates more and more and more. But there's ways that we can do this, not just like turn a blind eye. Hey, it's all good if you just want to do, shoot up your fentanyl in front of this person's store, which like we have in LA. That's terrible. Lock them all up, throw away the key. Terrible. Like, how do we treat this like a health issue? Well, we can do that through therapy. Like, did you work with drug addicts and find ways that successfully got them out of that life?
So I worked in these programs. There are mental health programs, and there's something called dual diagnosis. And what that means is a person, and this is most common of many drug addicts, is they have both a mental health issue and a drug issue. And so they kind of went on this track where had a substance abuse focus, and they also had mental health issues. So they were being seen by psychiatrists. Many of them were on medications. I know medications is a very controversial topic, but people with true schizophrenia and bipolar type 1 with severe manic episodes and whatnot, a lot of them really benefit from medication. So they were working, in this program, being monitored, and having all these things work together really did help them. So I forgot your original question.
No, yeah, just the idea of what has worked successfully in getting people out of their addiction, because the number one cause of death for 18 to 45-year-olds, the number one cause of death is drug overdoses right now.
Yeah.
That's
And
terrifying.
I mean, okay, if you want to get into there's so many complex things about the drugs that's happening right now. First of all, I mean, if we want to get into the lockdowns and all of that, I mean, that was terrible for substance abuse. What people who are addicts need is they need human contact. They all a lot of them rely on going to these 12-step programs daily to stay sober. And they
those were shut down.
Those were all shut down. If they're alone, they start to spiral, and they get their cravings, and there's no one there to help them. That's why there were so many overdoses. There were more than double overdoses in San Francisco than there were of COVID deaths. And so, we're like, oh, we're saving lives, but then all these people are dying of overdoses. Then there's the accessibility of drugs. There's becoming more and more. And of course, we have our open borders, which is bringing in all this fentanyl, which is becoming a huge problem in our country. Destigmatizing all of this stuff and normalizing it is not helping. So, and then of course, all the isolation and the people on social media and all that, there's so many different elements to what's causing this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think the breakdown of communities in general and isolating people is one of the biggest things that needs to be addressed. And if we're isolating people more and more, obviously with all these lockdowns, and we're still seeing the aftermath of it all, I think that's one of the biggest things that, we need to be able to, people feel disconnected and they're turning to drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, you have an area of expertise in anxiety, and I've been teaching high school now, this is my 17th year. I've never seen anxiety like I did the past 2 years after COVID.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's really horrible to see. These kids can't handle little tiny setbacks. They are just riddled. And it's like, you've been watching fear porn nonstop.
Yeah, I don't understand.
For years, of course.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah.
What are you seeing as far as the trends in anxiety, especially for young people, trends in anxiety, and what do you think is the way out of it? Because it seems pretty terrible.
I wish I knew the answer to that.
Yeah.
But anxiety was already a problem pre-COVID. People have a lot of anxiety, and I'd say one of the biggest issues. I was in Palo Alto during a big suicide cluster. It was featured in Atlantic magazine. It gained national attention. They were blaming
Describe what a suicide cluster is for the audience.
Okay, so 6 kids died by suicide at the same school in the same year.
Yeah, it's like copycat, like stuff. Yeah.
It was pretty awful. I luckily never met any of the kids that did it, so I wasn't. But anyway, but I met a lot of kids that knew the kids, and met a lot of kids that I personally called the police for to get them to the hospital safely, so that they wouldn't, commit suicide themselves. There was a lot of suicidal thoughts, suicidal behaviors, and whatnot. And what I saw there, they were blaming it on because it's a very high academic pressure school, and that is one element to it. But what I saw was the lack of resilience. Kids, that was in 2015, and I think that was the big shift when kids were. I think the participation trophies and the protections and we don't want to let them sort of fail and feel what it's like to, feel uncomfortable. And so when that started to happen when they were in high school, it was too much to bear. I mean, I had a kid literally got an A- and we had to send him to the hospital. It was the real deal.
Yes.
So, some of that was cultural. He was a Chinese boy, and there was some of that pressure, but I think it was beyond that too. It was that he had been protected for so long from feeling like he didn't know what it was like to not be perfect and to not have things go perfectly. And our culture was really protecting kids from that. And once they were starting to not feel everything go perfectly, go through a little breakup or have somebody say no to the prom or something like that, it devastated them. I mean, these are the things that we all go through in normal development, and these kids couldn't handle it. So the lack of resilience is tremendous. And that's just getting worse and worse. And with social media and kids not actually interacting with each other and learning how to problem solve and learning how to work it out among themselves, to, you know, basically have a real fight, not have the adults always jump in and do like, you know, anti-bullying. This anti-bullying is actually backfired. All of these things that sound good and they're supposed to help, I think they've all backfired. And that's why I think the kids are really suffering. That's pre-COVID. And then, oh my God, with the COVID stuff, I honestly can't wrap my head around it. I was actually still off on disability, but I had been in schools for so many years. I knew every day the kinds of kids, you know, were coming to me and to, you know, what they were going through, and to think about how they didn't have anybody to talk to or didn't have daily structure. And every day we're being told that they were going to kill their grandmas if they didn't do the right thing. I just seriously don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't understand how kids are able to process that and how they're going to rebound from this. The impact that they've done to kids. I mean, it makes me, you know, steam's coming out of my ears, and they're still doing it here. Where do you live? I'm
in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And the fact that adults are still doing this to children, it makes me really angry that the adults can't get past their own anxiety. I mean, the adults are the kids are absorbing the adults' anxiety. That's a lot of it.
Yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
Terrible.
I saw that a lot with a lot of teachers saying like, if you're young, okay, because kids will be like, well, I'm young, I'm okay. And they'll be like, if you don't do this, you will kill people. Like you are responsible for these people getting sick. Putting that on a child is unbelievable. It became the norm. That was the norm. That was the rhetoric being said.
It made me so angry. I was like, I don't know why this has to be said, but it's not any kid's responsibility to take care of any adult's life. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
What the hell is going on in our society? I mean, and they did that with COVID. They're doing that with all kinds of things. They're doing that with, you know, if a teacher comes out and says that they're now, you know, some queer identity, that the kids have to all say how wonderful and how brave they are, and they have to take care of them and their feelings. This is wrong. This is very, very wrong. The kids are taking care of adults' feelings. There's this codependence that's happening that is being inflicted upon them that is, you know, widespread, and it's emotionally so damaging onto children.
Well, kids are like, they're not as programmed yet as a lot of adults are, especially in like within like these kind of political ideologies. And so they're saying things like, well, wait a second, like if you're wearing a mask and you're vaccinated, don't those things protect you? And it's like, well, yes, but not as much as blah, blah, blah. Like the kids are like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense, but I guess I'm doing something bad, but I don't know really what I'm doing that's bad. So I don't know how to fix it. And they just spiral off.
That's what anxiety brings. It's this unknown. It's this, what do they call it? Like this free floating anxiety. And that's what's created a lot of this mass hysteria. So basically everything they've done has made it either worse or not helped at all. So, and they're trying to say, if you do this, this is what makes you a good person. And if you don't do this, you're a bad person. You're an anti whatever it is, right? And they've inflicted this, you know, adults have obviously fallen for it, but pushing this on kids, I think is, you know, even harder because they're not developmentally able to tease this out. If adults can't do it, how are kids going to be able to do it?
Well, and there's a social contagion element of that, and it kind of transitions into the next thing I want to talk to you about of social contagion, especially if you read like Abigail Schreier's work with the gender stuff and the transgender stuff. I had Xander Keg on here, who's great. He's, you know, National Social Worker of the Year and stuff, and he talks out a lot.
They don't like him anymore.
What's going on. No, apparently not.
National social workers, they don't like him, and they're
So like, he was doing amazing work until he disagreed with something. But anyway,
he actually told me the story. I could tell you the story of why he's shunned. It's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, I
want to get you.
No, I want to hear it. But I just want to set it up as like this idea of social contagion, this idea of gender theory and stuff becoming so mainstream, especially for young kids. You are an expert. Xander is an expert. You've dedicated your life to helping people in these communities, helping children in your case, all this kind of stuff. You deserve to be heard. That's why I want you on here. People can say like, oh, she's wrong, she's political, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, And when you put in your time, as you have, Pamela, you deserve to be heard. People can disagree with you. They're allowed to disagree with you. People who are credentialed as you can disagree with you. People who are just living in their basement can disagree with you. But you deserve to be heard, not shut down, not censored, which seems to be what's going on. So yeah, I'll talk to Xander about it too. But like, so his organization that said he was the best now are separating themselves from him.
Yeah, I mean, they were pulling identity politics with him, and now he hasn't toed the line, so they don't like it. But so yeah, I actually read Abigail Schreier's book. That was one of the things that inspired me to start talking. There's a whole chapter in there. You read the book, The Irreversible Damages?
Yes.
You know, so there's a whole chapter on the therapist. That's the title of the chapter. And you know, there's the whole beginning where she describes the profiles of the different kids, all girls, that have suddenly become transgender. And I was reading it, and the profiles match exactly what I was seeing in 2021 when I came back from my disability. Like kids that had, you know, never really had this before, that, you know, usually had some kind of social isolation issue where they didn't feel like they fit in with their peers, or they, you know, they had some other sort of issue, or some were, you know, on the autistic spectrum. Some had some kind of trauma in their history, or they were, you know, they felt powerless in their life in some way, and they suddenly became trans. And then when they became trans, it actually didn't help their mental health, because obviously the kids I was seeing were in a mental health program. A lot of them were just coming off of being hospitalized. So the program I was in, they were hospitalized, and then they go to this outpatient group therapy program to basically restable themselves back to society. They have this model for both adults and kids. So I was seeing that. So I was seeing all of that. And I was just, this is what I saw. And this is not the trans people that I've known my entire life, who are, one, very rare, and two, not looking for attention, not looking for people to validate the fact that they're trans. They want to blend in. That's how they always were. That's how I believe, you know, Xander always was, like, just wanting to, you know, this is how I'm not, you know, feeling, this is my feeling, but I'm not trying to get something out of this. I'm not, in fact, I don't even want you to know about this part about me. I just want to blend in as the thing that I'm feeling, but I'm not trying to push it on anybody. And I'm not trying to, you know, call my parents names about it or anything like that. And when I saw them all, you know, like using pronouns as kind of this like power move, that I was just, and the therapists that were around me weren't, you know, recognizing it, either weren't recognizing it or not saying anything. I'm not sure which. You know, that they needed someone to help them. They were floundering, but they were allowed to do all this, and it actually made them spiral and get worse. So I was watching this dynamic happen, and it was just like hard for me to watch. And then when I actually did call them out on it, obviously with compassion, the way you're saying, like, I wasn't like, so that's the thing about conservative frustrated, like, there are only two genders, stop with this crap, you know? And it's like, that's true, and they're telling the truth, and I actually don't knock them for it. But when you're talking to someone who's sort of in the thick of it, and they're feeling really lost, and they're feeling splintered as a human being, and they're feeling really empty inside, when you do that, you're shutting them down more. You know, they're basically causing them to be a turtle to crawl into their shell further. So you have to at least learn how to approach the person if you want to reach them, and, you know, form that rapport with them, and then ask them, you know, what's happening, and, you know, and then gently ask them, like, what is this, what are you getting out of this, you know, and asking them, you know, well, that sounds like you're trying to be like a victim instead of trying to get, you know, have them recognize you for something great that you've done. What, you know, why is that, you know? And I remember sort of confronting them that way, and it went a long way, and the kids actually really responded to me positively, and they liked that. And then they would say, I realized I'm getting myself in trouble on purpose, and it's not helping me. You know, I realized that, like, this one girl, she would say, first she would yell about how her parents were these big transphobes, and then she'd say, but I know they love me, and they've always been good parents, and, you know, and she was conflicted about it, because she knew they really weren't transphobes, but you know, so I talked to her about, like, well, how do you know they love you? And then she would say, like, oh, they care about me. And especially her dad, who wouldn't use her new name, you know, like, he'd only use her dead name. And she was really angry and say, well, he's transphobic. but he loves me. And so, to reach that side of her,
Yeah.
and she was conflicted, and she did have sexual trauma, and she did have like cutting behaviors, and
Hmm.
she hated it. She felt shame about it all. And but yet so she had these behaviors and this thing that this loop she's in, having shame about it. And the therapists were just affirming these things that were actually creating shame and creating conflict in her family. And so I was watching that and saying, this is not compassion. Compassion is actually working with the real issues at hand, and talking to them like human beings,
So what do you
looking at them
think?
as whole people.
Yeah, well, say,
Yeah.
Pamela, what do you think is going on? I am not, I don't have a master's in psychology or anything like that.
I don't
I'm
think you
not,
need one
well,
actually for
but
this.
well, that's what I'm getting at, is like, this seems very obvious to me. The social contagion element, the idea that kids who don't have a sense of self can be celebrated as heroes just for saying that they're this thing. They can be welcomed with open arms, all that kind of stuff. The isolation, it's very clear to me that what this is to some degree. And yet there are so many therapists who are affirming, like just the idea of like being an affirming therapist. You don't go to
Yeah, that's
therapy to
not
get
even a
affirming.
thing. I did
So
a tweet. I said, where I get affirmation from? My dog. My dog
but
affirms me every day when I get home. That's not therapy.
how do you explain so many people in your field acting in ways that are against like how the brain works, how the human body works, how emotions work, what your job of a therapist is? They're going against all that they've been taught, all that they know when it's isolated in a vacuum. Is it just ideology? Like, what do you think is going on here?
So,
These are
I mean, I have a few
experts doing
theories.
this.
I obviously
Yeah.
can't like mind read, but these are the
Okay.
things that I see.
Yeah.
One, there's a lot of people that agree with us, but they're silenced a lot. I get a ton of
Lack of
messages.
courage. Okay. That makes
So,
sense.
I don't even want to blame them. They need their jobs. The reason I'm able to speak out is because I
Yeah.
actually do still have chronic pain, and I do get some disability, and
Okay.
I can't even work full time.
Hmm.
So that's why I was like, I'm in this position to speak out that most people are not in. And that's why I started to speak. This is not my personality. I'm not even good at public speaking. And I don't like to be online and be an influencer or anything like that. This goes against my grain. But I realized I needed to step up because so many therapists' livelihoods are on the line, and we need more people to speak out. So they really do. I think a lot of people have been made examples of, and they have been fired. Abigail Shrier talks about that in her book. There are people, this is even years ago, like 2017 or whatnot, who were fired, and especially in the university settings, but I think in many settings. So yes, fear is huge. People are silenced. And then I think that propaganda. I think propaganda is huge. My entire field, like if you go on the National Association of Social Workers website, everything says affirm. I did it just to see what they were teaching, but I took a course and everything they say is affirm, affirm, affirm. This is a buzzword I didn't even hear before I went on disability. I left for disability the end of 2016. It was not used then. So it's just the repetition of these words, and that's what the left is good at, repeating words and saying it over again, so people just think it's true. So they're training this culture of listening to the experts. So if the people higher up in their field who are in silence, because there are plenty that have been silenced. I think this got so bad because of the silencing originally, and I wasn't keen on all of that because I think that this all happened years ago and I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't working in gender clinics to really see the inside of that. But I think the activists and the people who have money are behind this, and they're pulling the strings. And so our culture, I mean, just look what happened during COVID. Like the experts say, wear a mask. Well, even though there are 30 studies that say this masks don't do anything, even though it's right in front of their faces, we're all still getting sick while we're wearing our damn masks. Like what? So, but the experts say, and people just do it. And I really learned a lot about human nature. I did not realize how much people just listen if someone higher up says something. And social workers really are agreeable by nature. And I guess maybe I'm not as much, but I think that's also the temperament. Therapists are agreeable. I mean, we all go into counseling because we're nice people and we want to help, and we don't want to cause problems, and we're also not the personalities to be like, I believe this, I'm not Candace Owens. Like, I don't go out and be
Yeah.
like, I believe this, I don't care what you say. Like, we're agreeable. And
Right.
so if someone of authority, Rachel Levine, was
Mhm.
the guest or the, honorary, I don't know, keynote speaker at the latest National Association convention in June in Washington, D.C. I didn't hear what Rachel Levine had to say, but I'm sure it had a lot to do with using affirmative therapy for, gender affirming therapy. And so however many thousands of social workers that were there, and however many thousands of social workers that listened to that on their, Zoom broadcast are going to listen to that and say, well, this is what the experts say. So I'm not going to think for myself. And I don't know. A lot of them just don't think.
There's so much in alignment of what I see in education. Teachers who quietly tell me, thank you for speaking out. I wish I could. I also am in a unique situation where I can speak out. Yeah, so many elements of that, the agreeable personality, the thing of like, if you tell a kid that they're not something or they have to think about it, you're not supposed to question certain elements, all that kind of stuff. It really resonates, and it's a problem. And I think that, I know that maybe it's not fair to say that it's a lack of courage, but it also is. Look, it's easy for me to say.
I'm trying not to
I know it's
blame,
easier
because
for you
I'm
and me,
different.
but
Like, I don't know what I would do if I was in a different
I don't know either.
situation.
I don't know
Yeah.
either, but at some point, I guess my question then would always be, what is your line then? When is it worth possibly jeopardizing your job and things like that? Because at some point you have to have a line. And if you don't draw a line about when you're going to stand up, then you will just get bulldozed over and never say anything.
I wonder what I really believe is, I think if they really understood and knew the damage that's being done, they might have a different tune. But because that stuff is being glossed over and hidden, and it's being shown with rainbows and glitter and sunshine and being a good person and being accepting, it's under this guise of you're a good accepting person. I'm an open-minded person, so I would never go against the stuff. Like, I'm not a transphobe, so I would never go against it. So I think that stuff that really goes far.
Or it's only said in the right, like it's only said by Tucker Carlson and Dave Rubin and people like that. And most social workers, most school teachers don't watch Fox News.
Yeah.
So they're only going to get one side of it. It goes back to those echo chambers that I think are so dangerous. And along those lines, as we wrap it up, this is the cylinder radio. So the idea of cylinder radio, if it's like, that's a circle, right? That's a rectangle, but it's complex. That's the whole concept.
I know. I was thinking about that metaphor when I was looking at your thing.
Yeah, I mean, so I hate echo chambers. I think that they're really dangerous, and I think that we have access to information and people now to try and disrupt those to get a better, robust understanding. What would you say if we're gonna try and one of the techniques that I like to use is steel man as opposed to straw man? What do you think are the most valid critiques to your approach, or the pushback that people give you? What pushback have you gotten that you're like, okay, that's pretty good point. Okay, yep, I gotta kind of wrestle with that a little bit. Because I'm sure you get a lot of maybe hate pushback from people in your community, you mentioned that, like, friends of yours, but also in the professional world of social work and stuff like that. Do you think that there's something there, if you could steel man their arguments for gender affirming care, for lockdowns, for all that kind of stuff, what would you say is like the best arguments for that? This is a tough one to always do.
Oh, like, what's their point of view?
Yeah, like what's
I know their point of view, and I honestly, but what's really hard, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
So I actually sat on a few calls with this like LGBT alliance with NASW, really because I wanted to kind of hear what they had to say. And what I got to tell you, I liked them. I don't see them as enemies.
Right.
They were nice. They're just too nice. They were really nice. And they really seemed like they really believed that they were doing was helping. And so I really saw that in them. I don't see them as this like stupid, horrible, they're just trying to, butcher kids. And, I don't see them all as groomers. There are definitely the groomers, but I don't see them all that way. And I see most of them are people, and I see teachers this way too. I think our professions are very similar in their temperaments. That they're really just misguided, and if they weren't in their echo chambers, they would see it differently. And so I actually did sit on some calls with them, and they don't know I had this other point of view, and I had a very useful conversations with them. And I thought it was going to be a call with like 20 people, and it ended up being like 4. And so I had to participate. And there was this woman who came on talking. She was very insecure. She had a teenage boy who was trans. I don't know, however he identified, and she felt very insecure working with this kid. And all the people on the call were saying, affirm him, make sure he's okay, make sure he knows he's oppressed, and make sure he's not bullied, and all these things. And then I said, have you
Make
talked
sure
to
he
the
knows he's oppressed.
No, they really said that. I actually have the recording, and I actually did a recent post on that. They said, psychoeducate this child to tell them that they are systemically oppressed and as they are a part of the LGBT community. That is real. They said that. So instead of confronting them and saying, you're crazy, why are you telling them this? My approach was, and so I think this is how you and I are similar this way, is that, first of all, I come from sort of both sides, and I've been a social worker my whole life. And so I just said, why don't you look at this child as a whole person? Have you talked to them about what's going on with them? What are some of their underlying issues? What are some of their fears? Why are they scared? What are some of their experiences? Challenge some of their thoughts and their patterns and what their worldview is, and ask them and approach them and connect with them as a person. Because the counselor was so scared, I think so scared because of how this political climate, that she was going to do or say the wrong thing, that she was kind of paralyzed. So she came onto this group to like consult with the experts. And so what I was trying to get this counselor to say is, you've been a counselor for many years, you have skills, apply those skills, use your brain, use your judgment. I think this culture today is teaching counselors not to use their own judgment anymore as counselors, which is, you don't have to be an expert in a certain thing to be like, I know how to talk to a human being. They're human beings, for Christ's sake. And that did, I think it did reach her, and I reached the group. And they all said, that was great what Pamela said. And meanwhile, basically what I was saying to them all is, don't affirm this kid. And so I didn't say that in those words.
No, but you have to.
But they all agreed with me.
Yes.
So
I mean, you have to almost speak in code. Thank you for that. That's really good. I mean, I was laughing when you said that, but that's really heartbreaking. Telling young kids, make sure they know that they're oppressed.
They do. That's what they're I actually had a training on that. Like, if you go on the website, they tell you, they train you to teach that. It's insane. That's why I started to step up. I'm like, we're living in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, well, just because my wife is an immigrant. She came from the Philippines and came here with very little. She was along a lot of things, just like brown woman, ESL, all that kind of stuff. But she was raised in a family that was like, don't you ever say that you're anything but qualified and great and capable, and the world is out, like, and that's why she's successful. And it's just like, it just sounds terrible. But when you said that they're nice, they're almost too nice, you can see this in parents that are too nice. It's actually abuse. It's neglect. It's like parents would say, like, you can eat whatever you want, stay up as late as you want, that kind of stuff. That's the kind of thinking. And if you frame it that way, then every social worker, every teacher goes, oh yeah, for sure. It's not, it's nice to be like, give every kid an A, even though they just say, oh, I don't want to do my homework. Okay. But now apply that to the things that are within the culture war, is what I would say. But it's spot on. Is you can go to the extremes that are really damaging for kids. And it seems like we're just going, you can go to the extreme of being too harsh with kids. Absolutely. And a lot of people are, okay. But like, you better not be some stupid faggot in my room, blah, 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 blah. Like one of those, like, those people exist. And but
they're very rare, and people think they're going to be that boogeyman, so then they overcompensate.
And I think that looking at the harm that can be done from being too nice is something that I think that I would urge people who are critical of your work or critical of the stuff that we're talking about to just look at and look at how can you be kind in a way that holds up real boundaries for these kids to help guide them for what's going to be best for their future.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying exactly, I think is why I've always been so good at working with teenagers, because I had that balance between being very compassionate, being very understanding, kind of understanding the way you're describing earlier about, drug addicts. Oh, we got to not just throw them in jail. We got to be nice. We got to acknowledge what the pain they've been through, but also recognizing that there need to be consequences for behaviors, and to not just, overlook consequences. Because if you overlook consequences, then they don't actually make better choices for themselves. And people need accountability. And so especially kids who are floundering, especially kids who are acting out, kids who are in foster care that haven't had that structure in their lives, they're craving it. They're testing you. It is one big test.
Absolutely.
It's one big fat test to say, I need an adult that's going to set me straight, and I need that, and I want that. But they're not going to say that in words. They're going to say that in their behavior. And if you fail that test, then both they fail and you fail. Everybody fails, and we all lose.
That's spot on. That's a great way to end it. Pamela, where can people find you now that you're in this world? Welcome to the culture world.
Here I am.
when I started just leaving the classroom going in, I talked to Peter Boghossian, who I really love and really respect, and he was like, "All right, buckle up. You're choosing to throw your hat in the culture wars, man. Buckle up." And he's right. Weird. It gets a little turbulent, but where can people find and support what you're doing?
Okay, so I'm writing this online program to support parents, and it's not launched yet, but I'm very close, and hopefully it will be ready early September. And you can find my website at www.thetruthfultherapist.org. And you can sign up for my email list right now, so just to stay in touch. I'm on Instagram. I think that's how you found me, as the.truthful therapist. So the.truthful therapist. Someone took the regular truthful therapist without a dot. So I have the .truthful therapist.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I couldn't fit the truthful therapist on Twitter, so I'm red pilled LCSW on Twitter. I'm not as active on Twitter, but I am there. Those are the main socials that I'm on. But yeah, I guess my website, I mean, who knows if these social platforms will pull the plug on me. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So those are the main places to find me.
But you also have a website and people can Google and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can Google. At this point, you could probably Google my name and just find me.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for all my left-wing friends and family to find me and say, like, what the hell are you doing?
Well, hopefully they'll engage with you. Hopefully they'll engage with you with some curiosity.
Yeah, we'll see.
Pamela, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about this. Thank you for doing the work that you've done for 2 decades plus, and I hope you keep it up. And we need different angles to attack these problems. And we can take people from the left, from the right, wherever. But once people from all these different, I'll get a whole bunch of social workers together with different experiences, different angles, come together to talk about it, I think we'll be able to solve them. And I think that's what I'm calling for. So thank you so much.
And truthfully, like 5 years ago, about 5 years ago, what I'm saying was a pretty nonpartisan opinion. I didn't even know this stuff was political. I was very non-political in most of my life, to be honest. So yeah, I don't even think politics in a way have to do with it. I mean, they've been brought in, but they're not really significant if you take away that stuff. Yeah,
maybe take that away and just try to engage. Yeah. Well, thank
you
so much. Yes, with the ideas, no personal attacks.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.